Hi everyone, it's Amanda from the Quilting Bee in Massillon, Ohio, and today I am going to show you something I have become obsessed with: foundation paper piecing. Foundation paper piecing is where you cheat and you are following the lines. So there are some free patterns that I've put up on the website, so you can print that off and make this little 3-inch finished square. We're doing a log cabin, but it is amazing because you are stitching right up on the paper and you get this perfect dainty little log cabin or any other pattern that you find out there. There's a ton of free patterns. I'm going to put some free patterns on the website. I actually have an idea for a book because, you know, why not? So I wanted to show you my tips and tricks, what I have learned to make this a breeze. And I want you to give it a shot and see if you don't quickly find it as addicting as I do, because it's fantastic. So let me show you what you need to succeed. Oh, look at that, at foundation paper piecing. So like I said, if you go to the website, I have some free patterns out there. They are going to be finished 3, 5, and 6-inch blocks. There's also going to be a PDF that you can download for free. It's called Bee's FPP Tips and Tricks. And it's just something I made as sort of a reference, because if you don't do foundation paper piecing constantly, inevitably when you go to do that first piece, you're gonna be like, wait, am I right side up? Am I paper down? Which way am I doing? What am I doing? So I made a little cheat sheet that has just some helpful hints and a lot of what I'm gonna talk to you about today. So Bee's FPP Tips and Tricks is on the website. This free log cabin block is on the website. I'm doing the 3-inch because if I'm paper piecing, I want to do tiny. I don't want to do something larger. So print off that 3-inch log cabin finished 3-inch. When it's unfinished, it will be 3.5 inch. What's nice about my patterns, I'm also giving you that 1/4 inch seam allowance, so you don't have to add that on. Some other tools that are really indispensable. It's called an add a quarter seam ruler. It comes in many sizes, I've learned, because I have it in 3. I have a 12-inch version and it's a nice big ruler. It has a lip, which will become critical because you have to add a seam as you do this. There's also a 6-inch version, and this is another 6-inch version, but it's just 1 inch wide. So it comes in all kinds of different sizes. You'll see what I've done to my 6-inch ruler, because this is the size I use the most, is I've actually created a hinge to use. And you're going to see why this is so helpful as we get into this. This was a sympathy card from a very sweet woman who is a friend of mine and Doug's for his grandfather. So I took that because she made a cute little quilt card for us. And I created this hinge, so it keeps my add a seam ruler on there, and you'll see why this is critical, because you have to fold as you go. So you need an add a quarter seam ruler. You need either a hot iron, no steam. Steam is not our friend. We're using paper. No steam. A seam roller. A seam roller is your friend. If you aren't set up to be able to press immediately, I am, because I've made my little pressing table in another video. But if you're not, and you don't want to be getting up and down, up and down, up and down from your machine to do this, if you use a really good seam roller and just seam roller, I can't say that word right. So you can roll those seams flat and just keep going. That is your friend. You need a glue stick. This is only used in that first block that you do, but it is really, really helpful. Other helpful would be either a good lighting source, a good lamp, so you can hold the paper up and make sure everything is aligned, or a light table. I happen to have a light table from my mom because she had a second one. You can find these absolutely anywhere. Look at your craft stores. Really don't need to spend more than like 20, 25 bucks. So don't think you have to get some fancy schmancy, just a standard light table that turns on. Yay! Will suffice. So that's just a helpful. You don't have to have a light table. You can use a lamp, and I'm going to show you how, but it's just, you know, if it makes it easier, make it easier. And you need, of course, your pattern, and you need your fabrics. Now we are dealing with small little bits, but I have found if I take my fabrics that I'm going to use and subcut them down a bit, we're not going down to that exact size. I actually like to leave about an inch all the way around because you're going to be trimming as you go on this. It makes things easier. So I have gone ahead and determined which fabrics I'm going to use in this, and I have just cut them down so you're not using, she looks for anything. Well, so let's say I'm doing my center square, which is just center square, little tiny guy. I don't need to be using this big whole piece. That's as big as the finished block is going to be. So that's why I just cut a little piece out. By the way, if you use batiks in your entire block, this will be a bit easier because there's no right or wrong side to a batik. But chances are you're going to be using a print of some sort, so I want to show you my method as though they are all prints. This is my only batik, and then I'm using prints for everything else, just so you know how this goes. So let's get started. I am going to use my light table because I think it will just make it easier for everyone to see. So what you want to start off with is your pattern. We are going to turn this face down. So the reason the light table becomes handy is I can still see my pattern because that light is coming through. If you don't have a light board, you can hold it up to a lamp and you'll still be able to see it. We're going to put a dab of glue, and this is just School Elmer's glue, on our first square. So your pattern, you'll notice, is labeled A1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It keeps going around and around, just as you would sew a regular log cabin. We are going to go in order of those numbers. So I want to put a dab of glue face down on my A1. And that is just to hold my piece of fabric in place until I start stitching. So again, if this were a digital print, we want to put it with our fabric face up, so the print face up, onto that that dab of glue. And I'm not pressing it too hard because I want to flip it and make sure that outline of my fabric is extending at least a 1/4 inch beyond that first space. And it is because I was very generous when I cut that piece. So you want to make sure, again, that this piece of fabric, this is right side facing up, is extending at least a 1/4 inch beyond all 4 sides. Okay, so once we have that placed, we can turn it right side up, and we don't even need the light board really anymore. So I'm going to take this away, and this is where your handy dandy little tool, and you can use any card, any piece of cardstock, postcard that comes with the mail, you can use for this step. You're going to align your cardstock on the line that is between your first and second piece section. So what I do to get a nice crisp fold, so I'm going to line this right up against that line. Okay, so you can see right there. You fold your paper back. Now we've only glued that in place, so we don't want to do a lot of movement here. And then with this cardstock in place, this is where this hinge comes in handy. I can just drop this over. Again, I'm not moving anything. And we're going to trim away the excess. This is where this lip of this ruler gives us a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So trim that away. Lift this up. You're done with this for now. So you can put that aside. Now, if we look at what our next piece is, it's just a little piece of white or opposite color, you know, because these are going to be contrasting. So I just need a little piece of white. So I'm going to take my piece of white. Now this is a print. So this is right side. This is wrong side. So you're going to align along this 1/4 inch seam edge that you've created. And again, see how that glue is keeping that in place. Align your two edges because that gives you a good 1/4 inch seam. Right there. You want to make sure that this piece, A2, is going to be completely covered by this next piece. There's a few ways you can do this. Again, you could kind of hold it up to light and make sure that you get the coverage. You could bring your light box back and gauge that way. It's a little hard to see with this center being pink. Or what I have found works really well is I use a pin. So with this paper still folded, okay, so I know I've got my two edges together. You can see, if this were closer to you, you can see where the edge line is. So if I know I need to be able to cover at least that far over on my outer edge, if I put a pin in it, that shows me I'm going to have this much excess. And I can do that on either side of that little block. So if one side is there, I can put that pin in, and the other side, just making sure I'm seeing my right lines, is right there. I can poke a pin in, and I know I'm getting a 1/4 inch on either side. So that is what I like to use as a quick double check if I'm unsure. But again, I cut my pieces so nice and big so I don't have to worry about it. So now we're ready to stitch. Now, if you're just starting out, I highly recommend putting a pin in this because you don't want anything to move. We want these 1/4 inch seams to stay together. So I just put a pin further down. Again, I know I have all this extra fabric room. So if you put a pin in here, we are going to take this to the machine and we are just going to stitch on this first line between A1 and A2. Now, some people will say back stitch at your beginning and ending. The rule of thumb I have found works best for me is I start about a 1/4 inch above this line and I stop about a 1/4 inch below this line. You'll be able to tear those stitches out as we go around and fold, and it just prevents me from having to hit a button and backstitch throughout this process. You're going to see that I am loaded with red bobbin and blue top stitch. That is just so you can see my stitches on this paper as we go around. The other thing you want to do is reduce your stitch length to about 1.5. If you have to rip with Jack the Ripper, you can still do it. It's a little bit more tedious, but by reducing that stitch length, when it goes to tearing apart this copy paper, it makes a much better perforated edge. So reduce that stitch length to 1.5. And we're going to take this to the machine. I'm going to show you how I line it. And I'm going to start and stop about a 1/4 inch before and after the line that separates section 1 and section 2. So let's go stitch. Now, as you start paper piecing, you're going to learn kind of where you can align your paper to make sure you're going to be stitching right on that line between A1 and A2. I will tell you, as you start, if you start stitching and you find that you are a hair to the left or to the right of the line, do not try to correct. Just go ahead and follow that path that you have started, or else you will see it when you go and press. So do your best to stay right on that line, but if you start stitching and you see, oh, I am a hair left or a hair right, you just go with it and just stitch that same length. It's more important to get it straight all the way down than to try to stay on that line. Now, what you can also do is put your foot down, hand crank your needle, and I can see as I bring my needle down, I'm going to be too far to the right. So I'm going to raise my foot and just bring my paper over a little bit. What I have found is if I align the line on the paper with this side of my foot, I'm in a pretty good place. I'm going to back that up a bit so I can get those couple extra stitches. And that feels good. So then I'm going to slow this down. I have slowed down my machine. I don't try to whiz through this. And I have stitched my first bit. Now it gets messy with all these threads. So I have these great little snippers. So I'm just going to snip that away. And now we're going to press and keep moving on. Now this is where if you didn't have a mini iron handy, you could use your seam roller and just really press that seam to get it set. I happen to have my mini iron set up right here next to me, so I'm going to use this guy, steam off. Okay, so next we're going to work from A2 here to A3. So you're just going to turn your paper. You're going to need your at a seam 1/4 inch ruler. And if you have the cheat sheet, you know that it is the same routine that we keep doing, which is fold, trim, stitch, press, repeat. So we are once again going to fold on the line between A2 and A3. So we're just going to fold over that entire line that delineates. So I just align it right up against that drawn line. Fold this over. Now you can see, because we stitched a bit before and after, that there's some fabric coming with us. So instead what we do, pinch right there at that seam, and you can pull that paper back and the stitch in the fabric and get a nice fold there, and your fabric lays back flat. Bring over my little fold, and using your rotary cutter, you're going to trim away that excess. And we're ready to add our next piece. This is a Creative Grid 6x8 mat. By the way, it's great. It's really sturdy and it'll fit right over here to the right. So I love this guy. Thank you, Liz, for the suggestion. So we need another piece of white because this is a white piece. So I'm going to grab my next little guy, align my edges, and I'm aligned there. And I'm going to flip this up just to make sure, okay, there's my drawn line. Stick a pin just to make sure. I'm going to have plenty of my 1/4 inch. And the more you do paper piecing, you sort of, I don't know, it's like your instincts kick in. I know, based on what I'm seeing, I've got more than enough. So again, you could pin this if you need to. I'm just going to lay this right here, align my foot, keeping everything in place. Put that foot down. I'm going to back this up a little bit so I get more of a lead in. We're going to stitch again. Now I want to show you, you can see, I actually stitched to the right of the line. As soon as I started, I could tell I was to the right, and I just kept myself going all the way down to the right of the line. It is not a big deal. We're still good. So again, either using your seam roller. I'm going to trim this little bit of red. Since I'm using a red bobbin, we're going to see some of this coming through. We're not going to lose any sleep over it. So you can either roll that seam again or just use a hot iron to press. Okay. And then it is time to move from A3 to A4. So A4 is a contrasting fabric. So for my A4s, I'm actually using blue. So again, I'm just going to keep turning, and I'm always folding the line that touches the block or the section I just finished to go into the new one. So that's how I know I'm doing this line right here. So again, I put down my piece of paper, I bring out my little hinged tool I've created, get that right up against that fold line. There we go. Fold the paper back, pinch this seam to bring that fabric back, fold over my ruler, get that right aligned on that cardstock edge, trim, take that away, and now I'm going to take my piece of blue. And again, I have cut a very large piece for that blue, but I'd rather trim more. I'm working my way through a charm pack than have to keep double and triple checking. I can just tell I've got a nice big piece of blue. It's going to cover that. So I can just go ahead and stitch. So remember, fold, trim, stitch, press, repeat. So you can sort of see it starting to take form. You always stitch on the wrong side, by the way. You always want to see your lines and your numbers facing up. So we've done 1, 2, 3, and 4. At this point, I don't know what it is with my brain. I start putting just a little tick mark because for some reason I start to get confuzzled. So I like to put a little check mark to say, yep, I've done A1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm on to 5. 5 is another blue. So we just lay that down, make our fold, and you can sort of see if you're too far, because I'm catching some of that yellow when you're doing your fold. If you're going this far, you're too far into that block. So as you make your fold, you can kind of see, all right, yep, I'm right at that black line. So now you can see I've got 2 stitch seams to sort of pull back. And so you're just pinching and pulling that fabric back so it will lay flat so you can trim it. Now this is where there's 2 different ruler sizes. This is where you might have to pay attention and trim this. Since I've had to move this, I'm going to realign everything. There we go. I didn't bring it in far enough onto my handy dandy tool I've made. I'm doing my next piece of blue. So I'm just leaving my 1/4 inch seam, and you just keep aligning on that perfect edge. So you do want at least one side of your fabric to be straight, always putting together right sides together. So it's just like when we normally piece. That first piece we put on was right side up, and then I'm always putting my pieces right sides together. So there, I've got that lined up. I know that's more than enough to capture that piece of A5. Put my little check mark. So now it's time for A6, another piece of white. Bring everything forward and then pinch at those seams to bring that fabric back. If you just grabbed it anywhere, you risk tearing your paper too much, and that will just be a disaster, so don't do that. A 6-piece, I need to make sure I'm situated further to the right. I got a little skimpy as I cut this piece. So I am going to go ahead and just double check with a pin that if I go here, oops, see, I would have missed it. So I need to move this over. And again, I'm just going to keep stitching and going around and round and round. Good press. Just did A6. Time for A7. This is another one I got a little skimpy on, so I'm just going to make sure and check with my pins after I get this folded over. When you fold it over, you can feel the edge of your ruler align with that cardstock. Pick that up. There. So I know I've got it on the length. I just want to make sure this piece is going to be deep enough. So again, I'm going to do my pin test. And I'm going to make sure this is going to go deep enough. Yep, I'll be good there. So now as these pieces get longer, it definitely wouldn't hurt to put a pin in to keep everything together. So I'm going to do that now and just keep stitching. You get to where when you're doing so many round robins, you lose sight of where you're supposed to start and end. So I originally started here and realized, oh, my start spot is there. So I had to come all the way back here. So I did back stitch, and then I wanted to stop here, but I needed to keep going because this is section A8. So it does get tricky. That's why you just have to go slow, and I promise you'll get it. So let's trim this up and keep going. We only have a few more sections. Last piece of white. I'm just checking to make sure that white ends there. I'm going to have more than enough to extend. So fold that paper back over. You never want to stitch with the paper folded. You always want to lay it back out flat so you can see the correct stitch line. We are in the home stretch, folks. So it's time for A12. I'm using these bold pieces for that section. Line this right on that line, just like we've been doing, that separates the previous piece to this one. Sort of do a tester. I feel like that needs to come down just a hair. There we go. Make sure everything's nice and flat. Flip my hinge. Now you can see I've got some excess coming off this edge. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that because this is a lot of this is going to be gone once we trim up the block itself. I want to have at least some of this ombre. So again, right sides together, just like we always do. I'm going to take these two pieces. I know it's more than long and deep enough. I just want to make sure I've got enough starting on that side, and I do. Bring this up just a hair. We just did A12. It is time for the last piece. So again, what I meant before was you can see anything that's off this paper is just excess. We don't need it. So if it's really getting in your way, because sometimes this will get really floppy, you can go ahead and trim off those pieces just so they aren't quite so floppy, because we're going to be trimming anyways. But if it's driving you nuts, feel free. So on the last section, pull that a lot of stitches in the fabric, so I'm just going to make sure we're all good. Good. Pull it back, create that 1/4 inch seam. Again, always right sides together. Flip this to make sure I'm going to have enough. I am. Last stitch. Can you believe it? And now we can trim up our block. So again, I've got this handy dandy little guy, so I'm just going to trim this up right here. Anything you get from me will always have a 1/4 inch seam trim line. It will be the outwardmost line that's not shaded at all. It's just pure white. Other patterns that you get, you'll just want to read to see if they've given it to you or not, or if you need to create it as you trim. Everyone is going to be different, but I know that I gave myself that 1/4 inch seam. So just align your ruler. Now, all those other bits were pretty small, but this is still a good size, so I'm actually going to keep this guy. And are you ready for the big reveal? And there you have a perfect little mini log cabin. So that is paper piecing. Once you get started, you just go, go, go. If you are fortunate enough to have a nice sewing table, a large platform, get yourself a 6 by 8 inch cutting mat. It makes it easier to do everything here. Get yourself an add a 1/4 inch seam ruler. Please check with your local quilt store. We have them online. I know you can find them on Amazon and that kind of thing, but we always like to support our local quilt shops if we can. And get an Elmer's glue stick, steal one from your kids, and go to town, because it is really addictive to make these little guys. I will tell you, if you were so inclined to make a bunch of whatever block you're doing and sew them all together, you can see I've kept these are a different pattern. If you want to sew paper pieced blocks together to create something larger, you want to leave your paper on until the end, until you've actually joined your blocks, because it just helps keep everything accurate. But I will show you how easy it is to tear this paper off. This is just copy paper. They make other paper that you can run through your printer. I have found on mine sometimes it jams up a bit, so I prefer to just use my copy paper and reduce my stitch to 1.5 and just go to town. And then to tear this apart, since we use that smaller seam length, I mean, it is like just a perforated, like if you were to tear apart the stub for a bill or something, it just tears apart so nicely. And it's not ripping the stitches out because there's so many of them in there, keeping that together. Now, once you get to the interior, it gets a little bit tricky. You might want to grab yourself a needle and sort of get it started, just like that, to get those sections off. I've also found if you use a dab of water, and just get the seams a little wet, that can also help convince them that they really do want to just tear away. So you can also use a little water. They do make a water-soluble paper, but again, the cost of everything is up. I don't need to buy any more specialty things than I already have. So I have found that copy paper works just fine. So you tear it away once you're all done, and you are good to go. So stay tuned. I'm going to be doing more videos as I work on more complex blocks. But let me know if you have any questions. Again, you can see some of my stitching because I used red in the bobbin just in case I needed to show you an oopsies. But there you have it. Foundation paper piecing the Quilting Bee way.